Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into Five Nights TD, one of the most thrilling tower defense games out there right now. If you're anything like me, you've been hooked trying to fend off wave after wave of enemies with your favorite animatronics. Let's face it, building the perfect team isn't just fun, it's the key to dominating the leaderboards. And trust me, with all the iconic characters packed into this game, picking the best ones can feel like solving a Five Nights at Freddy's puzzle. Don't worry though, I've got you covered. In this video, we're breaking down the ultimate Five Nights TD tier list, ranking the animatronics from top tier MVPs to those, well, let's just say they're more decorative than deadly. Whether you're a newcomer trying to figure out who to upgrade first, or a seasoned pro looking for that competitive edge, stick around and I'll walk you through it all. Get ready to strategize because this list will make or break your defenses. Let's jump in. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking units in Five Nights TD. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. First, let's talk about the best units in the early game.
A very small portion of the audience is subscribed to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe if you like these types of videos. Thanks.
The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Toy Bonnie to Toy Freddy, Summer Toy Bartohi, Bonnie, and Foxy. Alright, let's dive into the world of Five Nights TD and talk about some of the worst starter units in the game. Now, we've all been there, staring at our unit lineup and realizing, wait a minute, this isn't going to end well. If you're using these units, you're probably in for a rough ride. Trust me, I get it, we've all made that rookie mistake. But let's take a moment to look at the ones you really should avoid if you want to save yourself some heartache. First up, we've got Toy Bonnie. Poor Toy Bonnie, his stats are just not it. Seriously, he's probably one of the worst epic units you could pick. Low damage, no real standout abilities, and honestly, you'd be better off with almost anything else. Then there's Toy Freddy. He's got the stats of a unit you'd expect to find in a beginner's guide, but that's about it. His range is miserable, and that 20 deeps, yeah, it's pretty much useless. It's one of those moments where you wish you had a refund button, but unfortunately, that's not how the game works. Lastly, let's talk about Summer Toy Bonnie and Foxy. Summer Toy Bonnie might sound cool, what with the slow debuff and all, but don't let that fool you. She's just not up to the task. You'll be much better off sticking with a basic starter unit. And then, Foxy? Oh, Foxy. A melee unit in a tower defense game? Yeah, I'm not sure what the devs were thinking with this one. It's just asking for disaster. Foxy is the kind of unit you place down, and within seconds, you realize you've made a huge mistake. So, if you're looking to avoid those painful moments, steer clear of these guys and save yourself some trouble. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Baker Toy Chica, Party Chica, Withered Chica, Sniper Cupcake, and Chica. Alright, so we've covered the best of the best, but let's take a step back and talk about some of the meh units in Five Nights TD. These aren't necessarily terrible, but they definitely aren't going to carry you through tough stages. First up, we've got Baker Toy Chica. She's an explosion unit, which sounds cool, right? But honestly, she's just decent at best. If you're in the early game and need something to hold down the fort, she'll get the job done, but she won't be winning any MVP awards. Next on the list is Party Chica. Yeah, she can dish out splash damage, but that's about where her usefulness ends. Her stats are pretty rough, so don't expect her to carry you through anything tough. She's fine for clearing out a few weak enemies early on, but you'll want to replace her as soon as you can. Withered Chica's not much better. Honestly, she's a step down from Toy Bonnie. If you're sticking with her for too long, you might be in trouble. Now, let's talk about Sniper Cupcake. The range is definitely a perk, but the low damage per second, DPS, really drags her down. Plus, she's limited to 3 placements, which can be a bit of a pain. She's useful in some situations, but don't expect her to carry a big wave of enemies. And finally, we've got Chica herself. She's another explosion unit, but her low attack speed makes her a bit of a drag. Use her in the early stages when the enemies are weak and easy to clean up, but she won't be much help when things start to get real. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Rockin' Bonnie, Pirate Withered Foxy, Vendor Toy Chica, Buccaneer Foxy, Major Freddy, and Freddy. So, you're just getting started in Five Nights TD and you're looking for some solid B tier units to help you out early on? Well, I got you covered. Let's dive into some of the best B tier starters. And trust me, these guys may not be top tier, but they're definitely reliable and can get you through those tough early waves. First up, we've got Rockin' Bonnie. Now, she's got that full AoE potential, which sounds great, right? But honestly, she can't quite compete with some of the other starters out there. Still, if you're using her in the early game, she's definitely not a bad choice. Just know that you'll want to upgrade when you can. Then there's Pirate Withered Foxy. This guy's kind of like Major Freddy's cousin, except with a bit less oomph. He's not going to blow anyone away with his DPS, but his solid presence on the field makes him a decent pick to have in the early game. He'll hold his own, but when it comes to pure damage, you might want to look for something a little stronger. Now, if you're looking for something a little more unique, Vendor Toy Chica might be your girl. She's essentially a more watered down version of Patriot Freddy. Not bad, but not as flashy. Still, for those first few waves, her decent attack power and versatility make her a solid pick to keep the enemies at bay. And hey, she's not the worst to have in your lineup. Last but definitely not least, let's talk about Buccaneer Foxy. This one's like Freddy, but better. He has a higher placement count, better damage, shorter cooldown, and a longer range. That makes him one of the top contenders for early game setups. If you're still running with regular Freddy, switching him out for Buccaneer Foxy will definitely give you an edge. Oh, and don't forget about Major Freddy with his solid single target, DPS, good range, and 4 placements. He's one of the better B tier picks, and even regular old Freddy, he's still a pretty awesome starter with his high placement count and low upgrade costs, making him a staple for anyone starting off. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Phantom Cupcake, Patriot Freddy, Endo02, Commando Endo, Rad Freddy, Nightmare Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Bumbuxy, and Cowboy Freddy. Alright, let's talk about some solid A tier starter units in Five Nights TD. Now, I know you're all about finding those reliable early game units, and trust me, these ones won't disappoint. They've got the firepower, the utility, and they just work. So, let's dive in. First up, we've got Phantom Cupcake. This guy isn't messing around. His DPS is absolutely one of the highest for any starter unit, making him a fantastic option for those early waves. He's like that one friend who's always reliable in a pinch, gets the job done without any fuss. If you want something that will keep those enemies at bay, Phantom Cupcake's your go-to. Next on the list is Patriot Freddy. If you need an ultra cheap, ultra effective explosion unit, look no further. He's perfect for clearing out big waves early on without draining your resources. You'll find him super useful in those tough stages where you need to clear large groups fast. The best part, he's affordable, so you won't be burning through your cash. Let's talk about Endo02 now. This one's all about that solid range and good single target DPS. If you've been using him, you've probably noticed he's pretty reliable. However, there's one thing to keep in mind, Phantom Foxy just outshines him in that department. But hey, if you're early in the game, Endo02 still does the trick. Then there's Rad Freddy. Now, if you've been using Sniper Cupcake, you're going to love Rad Freddy. He's like an upgraded version with double the DPS while keeping the other stats pretty much the same. If you're gearing up for those early stages, this guy is going to be your best friend. It's all about that burst damage when you need it most. And finally, we've got Nightmare Freddy. If you're tackling those compact early stages, this one's perfect. He has solid single target DPS, even though his range is a little on the low side. He's like a sneaky little powerhouse, getting in close, dealing the damage, and helping you push through those tight stages without breaking a sweat. So there you have it. These A-tier starters are solid, reliable, and ready to get the job done. Whether you need fast damage, solid defense, or something in between, these guys won't let you down in the early stages of Five Nights TD. Keep them in your lineup, and you'll be cruising through those levels with no problem. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Elizabeth, Freddle, Witch Toy Chica, Tavern Chica, Bonnet, and Phantom Foxy. Let's talk about some of the absolute powerhouse starter units in Five Nights TD. These guys are like the unsung heroes of the game. Cheap, effective, and super reliable. And the best part? You don't have to grind for hours to get them. So, grab a snack and let's dive into this list of awesome units that will carry you through the early rounds. First up, we've got Elizabeth. She's a splash slow unit, which means she doesn't just deal good damage, but also slows down enemies, giving you the upper hand in dealing with waves. Her DPS is top tier, and her range is solid. Oh, and did I mention her upgrades are dirt cheap? So you can keep her in play without worrying about draining your resources too quickly. Definitely one of the best choices if you're looking for a budget-friendly powerhouse. Next, we've got Freddle. Now, Freddle isn't quite the best starter, but he's still a strong contender. He's got some decent DPS and is definitely better than Commando Endo, but Here's the thing, his cooldown is a bit on the high side, so while he's reliable for the early game, he might fall off a bit when things start getting crazy. Still, if you can manage his cooldown, he's a solid pick for a starter unit. Witch Toy Chica though, she's a different beast. She's one of the best starters in the game, hands down, super cheap with a decent range, and she can handle both mobs and bosses with ease. Her splash attack is just the cherry on top. She clears out enemies like it's nothing. If you haven't already, you definitely want to add her to your roster. Then there's Tavern Chica, who's pretty OP for a starter. She combines great damage with a wide AoE splash attack, and her range is nothing to sneeze at. She's just got that perfect balance of offense and utility. If you can't decide between her and another unit, just go with Tavern Chica. You won't regret it, trust me. Bonnet, anyone? She's another splash type unit who does a ton of damage for how cheap she is. Honestly, her range and DPS are better than you'd expect for a starter unit, and her low cost makes her fantastic for farming upgrades and holding the line during tough waves. She's a real MVP, and I highly recommend her if you're looking to make those story mode rounds easier. And finally, Phantom Foxy. This little guy is a single target DPS unit, but what makes him so good is his price. He's super cheap, and while his DPS is focused on just one target at a time, he absolutely shreds early game enemies. With 4 placements, you can stack him and get insane damage in the beginning. He's an early game monster, no question about it. These units are the backbone of your team, and while they're not as flashy as the late game powerhouses, they'll make sure you've got a smooth ride through the tougher stages. So keep these guys in mind, upgrade them wisely, and watch them do their thing. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Fortified Endozoa, Phone Guy, Purbuzz, Purple Guy, La, Tarnished Spring Bonnie, Grim Foxy, and Jackpot Freddy. Alright, let's dive into the S+ tier starter units in Five Nights TD. These are the absolute top tier units you'll want to have in your lineup, even if you're just starting out. You might have seen a bunch of units that seem good, but these are the ones that can really carry your game, even into the late stages. If you're planning your strategy, these are the ones to focus on. First up, we've got Fortified Endozoa. This guy's a beast when it comes to DPS, and he's easily one of the top starter units in the game. The downside, well, his recipe is pretty expensive, so you'll need to be a bit careful with your resources. You might be tempted to go for other evolutions, but if you can manage to build him, he'll definitely pay off with that insane damage output. Just keep in mind, the cost is a bit of a hurdle, so use your resources wisely. Then there's Phone Guy, and let me tell you, this guy is wild. He's got full AoE, area of effect, meaning he can deal with a whole bunch of enemies at once. Not only does he dish out great DPS, but his range is excellent too. And the best part? He slows down enemies, which is a game changer, especially if you're trying to keep the pressure on your opponents. If you're looking for a solid, reliable unit, Phone Guy is up there with the best, even in the endgame. Now, let's talk about Purple Guy. This new starter unit is an absolute gem. He spawns turrets, and these turrets have fantastic range and damage. Seriously, they're like little damage machines that just keep going. Purple Guy might not be the first unit you get your hands on, but once you do, he'll be a game changer. If you want to set up a solid defense while your main units go to town, this guy's got your back. Moving on to Tarnished Spring Bonnie. She might look like a melee unit, but don't let that fool you. Her damage and range are insane. She can deal some serious damage, and if you're lucky enough to get her, she can absolutely hold her own in battle. The only downside? Getting her isn't as easy as grabbing someone like Patriot Freddy or Witch Toy Chica, but if you do manage to get her, she's definitely worth the effort. Grim Foxy is another one that's worth mentioning. He's a powerhouse with fantastic DPS and splash damage, which makes him one of the best starters right now. His splash attacks will melt through enemies, and that DPS is no joke. If you're looking for something that can take down a lot of enemies in one go, Grim Foxy is the way to go, just a real menace in battle. Last but not least, we've got Jackpot Freddy. This guy's not just about damage, he's also great for earning you extra money, which can really come in handy as the game goes on. While his range might not be the best at first, once you boost that, he becomes an absolute gem. Solid damage and the money making, Jackpot Freddy has got it all. So, there you have it. These S+ tier starter units are the ones to keep an eye on as you play through Five Nights TD. Whether it's for their DPS, splash attacks, or money-making abilities, each of these units brings something awesome to the table. Just remember, managing your resources and planning ahead will make all the difference in getting the most out of them. Now let's talk about the best units in mid-game. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Cupcake Tank, Balloon Boy, Golden Freddy, Nightmare Chica, and Toy Chica. Let's talk about some of the absolute duds in Five Nights TD. You know, the units that make you scratch your head and wonder if they're even worth putting down in the first place. I'm sure you've run into them, the ones that cost a ton but do basically nothing. Let's start with the Cupcake Tank. I mean, this guy's more of a decoration than an actual defender. Its summons are so irrelevant that I honestly had to give it its own tier. It's like you're paying for a glorified cupcake stand that does a little bit of damage. Not really a fair trade, is it? Now, Balloon Boy. Oh boy, don't get me started on this one. Picture Toy Chica, but somehow 4 times more expensive. Yeah, you think the price tag would come with some serious upgrades, right? Nope! Balloon Boy might just be one of the worst units in the entire game. He's got the looks, sure, but that's about it. Don't even bother spending your resources on him. You'll regret it, trust me. Next up is Golden Freddy. The guy's got a low DPS and a price that'll make you want to cry. There's not much else to say here other than that Golden Freddy is more of a please no than a please yes when it comes to mid-game defense. He's like the unit you get for free in your dreams, but in the game, he's a total nightmare. I mean, I'd rather save my coins for something with a little more bite. Finally, we have Nightmare Chica and Toy Chica, 2 peas in a pod, but with some major differences. Nightmare Chica's got a hefty cost for what she does. Her range and DPS are lackluster, which makes her feel almost useless in the mid-game. Toy Chica, on the other hand, is just meh. Her range is terrible and her DPS doesn't exactly scream top tier unit. If you're picking between them, it's like choosing the lesser of 2 evils. Neither one's gonna get you a win, so save your resources for something better. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, 7Cs, Foxy, Bonnie, Nightmare Balloon Boy, Coco Boy, Nightmare Cupcake, and Withered Foxy. Alright, let's talk about some of the units you might find yourself using in the mid-game in Five Nights TD, and yeah, some of them are definitely a bit underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, they have their moments, but when you stack them up against other units, you'll see why they sit in the C tier. First up, we have 7C's Foxy. Now, this guy is basically a toned down version of Leviathan Mangle. Sure, he has a longer range, which is nice, but he's just not hitting as hard as some of the other mid-game options out there. His primary purpose is to help with mobs, but compared to other units that can handle both mobs and tougher enemies, 7C's Foxy kind of gets left behind. He's useful for sure, but you'll probably be looking for an upgrade sooner rather than later. Then there's Bonnie. You know, I can't help but feel like Bonnie is the Withered Freddy that decided to go for a higher range. But in doing so, he forgot how to deal damage. His DPS isn't great, and because of his higher placement and upgrade cost, you're kind of wondering if he's worth using at all. There are just so many other units that do more for less, so Bonnie kind of feels like a bit of a trap if you're not careful with your resources. Now, onto Nightmare Balloon Boy, or as I like to call him, the Mythic Letdown. He does have Pierce, which sounds cool on paper, but with his low DPS and range, he just doesn't live up to the hype. He feels more like a mid-game unit that's trying to be better than he actually is. You'd think with his mythic status he'd be a game changer, but unfortunately he's more of a maybe next time kind of unit. Nightmare Cupcake is another one of those single target DPS units that just can't keep up in the mid-game. You'd think the whole Nightmare theme would give her a bit more power, but nope. She struggles to handle multiple enemies at once, and when you're facing off against waves of mobs, she's just not cutting it. If you need a unit to focus on one enemy, she's okay, but that's about it. And finally, let's talk about Withered Foxy. This guy used to be the meta back in the day, and you probably see him in every other setup, but times have changed, and now Withered Foxy is easily overshadowed by better mid-game units. Sure, you can still use him as a starter, but even in that role, there are much better choices. He's just not the powerhouse he used to be, and if you want to make it far into the mid-game, you're probably better off with someone else. So yeah, these units can get you through some parts of the game, but if you want to push further, you're going to need to make some upgrades. Keep an eye out for better units to replace these guys as soon as you can. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Algae Fredbear, Withered Freddy, Mercenary Foxy, Nightmare Foxy, Endozo 3, Artillery Puppet, Hooligan Toy Bonnie, Glitched Cupcake, and Jack O Chica. Alright, let's dive into some of the B tier units in Five Nights TD that you'll want to keep an eye on during the mid game. These aren't the flashiest picks, but they can absolutely hold their own. So if you're looking for some decent backup or just need to mix things up, these guys might be worth considering. First up, we've got Algae Fredbear. This guy is like a toned down version of Withered Golden Freddy. He might only have 3 max placements, but don't let that fool you. He's still pretty solid. His damage isn't the highest, but he'll help you get through those waves where you need a reliable, no frills unit that can dish out consistent damage. If you're looking for something simple but effective, Algae Fredbear is your guy. Then there's Withered Freddy, another continuous unit. Now don't get me wrong, since his DPS is respectable, but the kicker is his upgrade cost. That's where things get tricky. It can be tough to justify upgrading him when there are better, more cost-effective units out there. Still, if you're in a pinch and you need something that sticks around, Withered Freddy's got your back, even if he's not the top pick. Moving on to Mercenary Foxy, and this one is a bit of a sleeper hit. It's super cheap to place and upgrade, which makes him a fantastic option if you're trying to keep your costs down while still dealing decent damage. Sure, his base damage is a little low, but the ability to place 4 of these guys more than makes up for it. He's definitely not the flashiest, but he's solid in the mid game and can get the job done without breaking the bank. Next, let's talk about Nightmare Foxy. He's kind of like the cool cousin of PBB with similar damage, but what sets him apart is his shorter cooldown and longer range. Sure, he has a smaller AoE, but that range can help you hit enemies before they get too close. He's a great pick if you're dealing with those longer lanes and need something that can keep up the pressure from a distance. Just don't expect him to clear huge crowds like some of the A tier units can. Finally, we've got Endo Shofree, who recently got a nice little buff, making him a pretty viable option in the B tier. He's got a placement count of 4 and solid single target DPS. While he might not be the most exciting pick, he's reliable and can dish out some serious damage to tough enemies. If you're looking for someone to lock down those stronger foes while you manage the rest of your defense, Endo Shofree is a solid choice. So, there you have it. These B tier units might not have the glory of S tier, but they can certainly help carry you through some of the tougher mid-game levels. Sometimes, the underdogs are exactly what you need to get through those tricky spots, and these units prove that. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Slick Bonnie, Nightmare Fredbear, Sentinel Bonnie, Rocketeer Mangle, Withered Golden Freddy, Phantom Golden Freddy, and Pumpkin Balloon Boy. Alright, let's dive right into some of the A tier mid-game units in Five Nights TD. These are the ones that might not be top tier like the S tier powerhouses, but trust me, they'll definitely get the job done when you're cruising through those middle stages. First up, we've got Slick Bonnie. Now, I know what you're thinking. This one sounds like a slightly watered down version of Bounty Mangle. And yeah, you're right. Slick Bonnie costs less, doesn't have the same insane range or DPS, but it's still a beast in its own right. You'll notice that when you place this one down, it holds its own and shreds through enemies with ease. Perfect for keeping those mid-game waves in check. Next, let's talk about Nightmare Fredbear. This guy is solid, no doubt about it. But when you pit him against some of the S tier heavyweights like War Machine Foxy, you'll quickly realize he's not the absolute top dog. Still, Fredbear's a reliable unit that can really help in those crucial mid-game moments. He does enough damage, has decent range, and his overall utility just can't be ignored. But remember, if you've got access to S tier units, you might want to swap him out later on. Now, Sentinel Bonnie is pretty interesting. Think of it as a budget version of War Machine Foxy. While it doesn't hit as hard or have the same range, it's still a solid choice for holding the fort during the mid-game. It's like having a backup that can keep the pressure on without completely breaking the bank. You'll find that it can still clear a lot of mobs efficiently, just don't expect it to carry your team like some of the bigger units can. Moving on to Rocketeer Mangle. Now, if you love that explosion DPS, this one's for you. It's got one of the highest DPS ratings for explosion units, but here's the catch. Its range isn't the greatest. That means you've got to position it carefully to get the most out of it, but when you do, it can dish out some serious damage. If you're good with placement, this unit is going to absolutely tear through waves of enemies. Just make sure you're not overestimating its range or it might leave you hanging at the wrong moment. Finally, let's talk about Withered Golden Freddy. This unit might just edge out Sentinel Bonnie for the top spot in the mid-game. With more placement slots and a higher total DPS, Withered Golden Freddy is a solid powerhouse. Sure, you'll need to invest a bit more to fully upgrade it, but once you do, it'll be a force to be reckoned with. And don't forget about Phantom Golden Freddy, which is kind of like a slightly weaker version of Withered Golden Freddy. It still holds up in the mid-game, but if you've got the resources, you're probably going to want to lean toward Withered Golden Freddy for that extra punch. So, there you have it. These A-tier units are your reliable go-to guys when you're looking for solid performance but not quite ready to break into S-tier territory. They might not have the flashiest stats, but they can definitely hold their own and help you push through the mid-game with ease. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Scott, Phantom Balloon Boy, Jacko Cannon, War Machine Foxy, Blind Eye Foxy, Lolbit, Endo 04, Rave Demon Bonnie, Jacko Bonnie, and Funtime Freddy. Alright, let's dive right into it. If you're looking to absolutely crush the mid game in Five Nights TD, then these S tier units are your go-to picks. First up, we've got Scott, and let me tell you, this guy is an absolute monster. Seriously, his damage, splash radius, and range are insane. With 6 upgrade levels, he's basically designed to solo carry you through the mid game. Place him down and watch him melt enemies. He's got everything you need to breeze through those tough levels. Next on the list is Phantom Balloon Boy. This guy's got massive damage, range, and AoE. He's the real deal when it comes to handling crowds. But here's the catch, his upgrades aren't exactly cheap, so you'll need to plan ahead a bit. Still, if you've got the cash, Phantom Balloon Boy will be your best friend for those mid-game waves. The damage output alone makes it worth it. If you're looking for something a little more budget-friendly, Jacko Cannon might be just what you need. Now, Jacko Cannon's placement cost is a bit high, so it's not something you'll throw down first, but his upgrades are ridiculously cheap. Once you get him rolling, he becomes a solid addition to your team. He's not the absolute best mid-game unit, but given how cheap his upgrades are, it's hard not to recommend him. War Machine Foxy is another unit that's perfect for the mid-game. The combo of high stats and a low placement cost means you can get this guy up and running quickly without draining your resources. You'll be able to transition to your more expensive units much sooner, all while War Machine Foxy holds the line. Quick to upgrade, cheap to place, what's not to love? Let's not forget about Blind Eye Foxy. This one is a beast when it comes to DPS and slowing down enemies. If you're dealing with bosses or big tough enemies, this unit is invaluable. The ability to slow down enemies while dishing out damage is a game changer, especially when you need to control those tougher waves. Blind Eye Foxy might not be a splash damage king, but his boss killing potential is top notch. And lastly, we've got Funtime Freddy, a legendary epic DPS unit. With a splash attack that covers a solid radius, excellent DPS, and decent range, Funtime Freddy is arguably the best deep you can get at this stage. The only downside is the relatively high placement and upgrade cost, but if you've got the funds, this unit will carry you through those tricky mid-game levels without breaking a sweat. So, there you have it, the absolute top tier mid-game units in Five Nights TD. These units are all about balancing great damage with smart placement and upgrades. Whether you're looking for massive splash damage or a solid reliable DPS unit, these guys have you covered. Let me know in the comments which ones you like to use, or if there are any other units you think deserve a spot on this list. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Anim Dude, Galleon Foxy, Circuit Breaker Freddy, Fazbear Mafia, Mendo, Bounty Mangle, and Flame Empress Chica. Alright, now let's talk about the absolute game changers in Five Nights TD that absolutely dominate the mid game. These units are so good, they'll make you feel like you've unlocked a cheat code for success. We're talking about S+ tier units. The ones you want to get your hands on if you're aiming to crush your enemies and flex on your friends. So grab some popcorn, because this list is packed with units that will make your strategy unstoppable. First up, we've got Anim Dude. This guy is a straight up upgrade from Scott. He's got the power, the damage, the everything. But here's the catch, his upgrades don't come cheap, and while his recipe might look tempting, you'll want to carefully think about where you invest your resources, because those crafting materials could be better spent elsewhere. But when you finally unlock him, you'll see why he's worth the grind. This unit just hits differently. Next, Galleon Foxy steps in, and let me tell you, this unit is a mid-game legend. With damage that rivals some end-game units, Foxy takes things up a notch with that splash attack that slows enemies down. Imagine controlling the battlefield with AoE damage and crowd control all at once. It's like the ultimate support and damage dealer rolled into one. Seriously, if you're not using him, you're missing out. Now, let's talk about Circuit Breaker Freddy, or as I like to call him, the single target monster. His DPS is insane, especially in those tight spots where you need to take out specific threats fast. Sure, he's a little expensive to place, but that high DPS makes up for it. He's not just a mid-game powerhouse either, he holds his own in the later stages too, making him a solid all-arounder in your squad. Then there's Fazbear Mafia. Don't let the name fool you. These guys are absolute beast mode. It's a summon unit with crazy DPS, and you'll quickly realize it's one of the best units to have in your arsenal. As you progress through the waves, this squad will rack up kills with ease. If you've got Fazbear Mafia on your side, you're basically living the dream. Bounty Mangle is another one you don't want to sleep on. This unit packs a massive AoE punch that deals crazy damage with a short cooldown. On top of that, it has a solid range of 30, and it even farms gold. Yes, you heard that right. This thing brings in cash while demolishing your enemies. Talk about making money and crushing it all at once. This unit's a mid-game must-have for sure. Finally, we've got Flame Empress Chica. If you think she's just another fire-themed unit, think again. She's a powerhouse with great range, quick cooldowns, and solid DPS. Add in the splash burn effect, and her damage potential skyrockets. She's an absolute monster when it comes to clearing out those big groups of enemies. Plus, her ability to deal damage across a wide area while still having that burn effect just puts her on another level. Trust me, she'll make your strategy way stronger. So, there you have it. Some of the most OP mid-game units in Five Nights TD. Each of these guys has something special to bring to the table, and if you use them right, your enemies won't know what hit them. Whether it's crazy damage, splash attacks, or insane DPS, these units are the real deal. Make sure you get them in your team and watch your power level soar. Finally, let's move on to the best endgame and support units. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Eclipse Ballara, Music Man, Boombox Foxy, Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Ballara, Maestro Puppet, Plush Trap, Hawaii Endo 02, Endo, The Crying Child, Amalgam, and Faz Card. Alright, let's get straight into it. If you're playing Five Nights TD and you're looking for the best support units to max out your game, then you're in the right place. Support units are like the unsung heroes. They're not the ones causing all the damage, but without them, your team would fall apart. So, who's worth your time, and who should you maybe just leave on the bench? Let's break it down. First off, Eclipse Ballara is basically the queen of support in Five Nights TD right now. I mean, she does it all. Buffs both damage and cooldowns, which makes her the ultimate support unit in the game. If you want to be serious about your endless runs, Eclipse Ballara is non-negotiable. She's the backbone of any solid team. Her buffs make everything else run smoother and faster. Don't miss out on her. Next, we've got Music Man, and let me tell you, this guy's got some moves. He reduces cooldowns of nearby units, which is clutch when you're using a lot of abilities that rely on quick refreshes. If you've got units applying debuffs or needing fast rotations, Music Man is the guy you want in the squad. He's a bit of a specialist, but when it comes to cooldown reduction, he's top tier. Now, let's talk Boombox Foxy. She's not quite as good as Music Man in terms of cooldown reduction, but what sets her apart is her 25% AoE slow. This ability is huge in keeping enemies at bay while your DPS units do their thing. The slow effect can make a massive difference, especially when you're trying to control hordes of enemies. Boombox Foxy might not be the absolute best, but she's definitely in the upper echelon. Fredbear is a beast in his own right. Think of him as a souped up version of Hawaii Endo 02. His range boost is way better, and you can place one more of him on the field, making him an even better choice for supporting your team. If you're looking for a reliable range buffer that will push your team to the next level, Fredbear is your guy. Spring Bonnie is like a slightly stronger version of Endo. You can use both in tandem for endless runs, and they'll support each other perfectly. She's got that extra oomph, making her a solid pick if you're looking to keep things consistent and steady throughout longer games. When it comes to stacking up on those range buffs, Spring Bonnie is one of the best. Then there's Ballara, who is almost like the middle ground between Music Man and Fredbear. She's got similar stats to Music Man, but her cooldown reduction is just a tad weaker. She's still a solid pick, especially if you don't have access to the top tier units yet. Plus, she's pretty easy to get, so she's great for players who are just starting out. If you're looking for something that's easy to get but still effective, Maestro Puppet might be your go-to. It's almost like a cheaper Fredbear with slightly lower stats, but it still does the job when it comes to providing range buffs. It's a great unit to start building a solid support foundation, and you won't have to grind too hard for it. And finally, we've got the Faz card. Yeah, I don't know about this one either. It's the first money farming unit, and honestly, it's pretty useless in any game mode that requires actual strategy. You might get some use out of it in certain scenarios, but don't expect it to be anything close to a game changer. In fact, if you ask me, Fazcade might just be one of the worst units on this list. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Phantom Chica, Phantom Freddy, Shadow Freddy, Mangle, and Puppet. Alright, let's dive into some of the Five Nights TD units that really don't shine too bright at the endgame. We're talking about the D tier units here, the ones that make you scratch your head and wonder if you could have spent your cash a little more wisely. So, buckle up and let's take a look at the ones you might want to avoid when you're aiming for that top tier squad. First up, we have Phantom Chica. Now don't get me wrong, Phantom Chica has her moments. Once fully upgraded, she has a decent AoE explosions, a nice low cooldown, and her damage isn't terrible. But honestly, compared to other endgame units, she's just okay. Think of her as a better version of Mangle, but that's not saying much, right? In the grand scheme of things, she's still a bit lackluster when stacked up against the competition. Then there's Phantom Freddy. Oh boy, where do I start? For a 15k unit, you'd expect more than what this guy brings to the table. With a low placement count, weak DPS, and range that just doesn't cut it, Phantom Freddy feels like you're paying a premium for a unit that's barely pulling its weight. If they buff him a little, maybe he'll be more viable, but right now, he's sitting comfortably in D tier, and for good reason. Shadow Freddy? Ugh, don't even get me started. This guy's total DPS and AoE range are just sad. He's a far cry from other powerful units like Shadow Bonnie or Blighted Endo Freddy. If you're looking to maximize your damage and control, Shadow Freddy is definitely a no-go. There's just no reason to use him when there are way better options in the same category. And then there's Mangle, a unit that honestly needs a lot of love. Her DPS is low, her range is weak, and the explosion radius is just disappointing. You'd be better off investing in pretty much any other late game unit. I mean, unless you're feeling a bit nostalgic or need something just to fill the gaps, but even then, there are better choices. It's hard to see why anyone would pick Mangle over other, more powerful units. Lastly, Puppet. Oh man, this one's a classic example of how rebalancing can go completely wrong. Despite all the attempts to make Puppet better, it's somehow still one of the worst choices in the game. With one of the lowest DPSs in the entire unit roster, it's a total pain to use. Unless you're looking for a challenge that'll make you question your life choices, just steer clear of Puppet and grab something else that actually gets the job done. So, there you have it. These units might look cool, but when it comes to Five Nights TD, they just don't hold up at the endgame. Avoid these D-tier picks and make sure you're investing in units that will actually pull their weight in those tough waves. Trust me, your future self will thank you. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Blighted Endo Freddy, Marionettes Puppeteer, Bounded Shadow, Withered Bonnie, Plain Boy, Enforcer Bonnie, and Phantom Puppet. Alright, let's talk about some of the units in Five Nights TD that fall into the C tier for endgame. These units might not be the most powerful, but they still have their moments, and I'm here to break down why you might want to consider them, or maybe just skip them entirely. Let's dive in. First up, we've got Blighted Endo Freddy. Now, this guy's a full AoE unit with decent range and solid DPS, but when you compare him to other endgame options, his performance just isn't all that impressive. He's kind of like the Marionette in a different skin. Good, but not exactly game-changing though. So if you're deciding between the two, you might want to look elsewhere unless you're really set on AoE damage. Speaking of which, Marionette's Puppeteer is a bit of a budget pick. It's a solid option if you're trying to save some resources, offering high AoE DPS when fully upgraded. The downside, its range is kinda lacking, so while it can pack a punch, you're gonna have to be strategic with placement. If you're on a budget though, it's definitely worth considering. Now, let's talk about Bounded Shadow. This guy is one of the better Pierce Towers stats-wise, and his DPS is pretty good too. But here's the catch, he's got low range and only 2 placements, which really hold him back. If you're looking for something that can cover a wide area, this one's probably not going to cut it. But if you can work around those limitations, he can still be useful in certain situations. Finally, we've got the likes of Withered Bonnie and Plain Boy. Withered Bonnie is like a long-range version of Shadow Freddy, but with slightly worse stats. Still, she's relatively cheap, so she's a good investment if you need something that can hit from afar. On the other hand, Plain Boy, while having decent range and DPS, is one of the most expensive units to place, and with only 2 placements available, it really can't compare to Phantom Mangle or some of the other endgame picks. But hey, if you've got the resources, she can still be fun to mess around with. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Shadow Bonnie, Phantom Mangle, Leviathan Mangle, Wraith Freddy, Tuned Mangle, Spectral Chica, Clown Trap, Abyssal Foxy, Tangle, and Nightmare. Let's talk about some of the units in Five Nights TD that are good, but not quite top tier material. These B tier units are solid choices for endgame, but they've got their quirks. Some have great abilities, while others fall short in comparison to the heavy hitters like Valkyrie Chica or Withered Endo Freddy. But hey, they're still worth considering if you've got the right strategy. Let's dive into the details. First up, we've got Shadow Bonnie. Now, Shadow Bonnie is a powerhouse when it comes to raw strength, about 50% stronger than Blighted Endo Freddy. However, there's a catch, his range is pretty short. so while he can pack a punch, you've got to position him carefully to make the most of his damage. Plus, he's quite expensive, but when you're in endless mode, that cost isn't much of a hurdle. If you can get him on the battlefield, he can do some serious work. Next, let's talk about Phantom Mangle. Single target DPS wise, Phantom Mangle holds its own, but it's no Valkyrie Chica. If you're looking for consistent high damage, you might want to look elsewhere. However, if you're dealing with enemies that are a bit spread out, it can be quite effective. It's just that compared to the top tier units, it feels like it falls a bit behind when the stakes are high. Then there's Leviathan Mangle. This one's a bit of a wild card. It's a solid pierce unit, making it great for taking down multiple enemies at once. The fact that its single target DPS isn't too bad just adds to its appeal. If you're dealing with a lot of groups, this unit really shines, but when it comes to straight up DPS, it's not going to outshine the heavy hitters in the game. Now, let's discuss Wraith Freddy. This guy is a full AoE unit with a huge spread of damage. His DPS matches that of Withered Endo Freddy, and you even get an extra placement, which is awesome for crowd control. The only thing to keep in mind is that his range is relatively short, so you'll need to think strategically about where you place him. If you can get him in the right spot, he'll melt through waves like a pro. Tuned Mangle is up next, and while it's an improvement over regular Mangle, it's still not quite on the level of the top tier units. What sets it apart though is its massive splash AoE, which can really help clear large groups of enemies. It's not overpowered, but it's still a solid choice for endgame if you need some extra firepower. Finally, let's wrap it up with Spectral Chica. This one is a significant upgrade over Phantom Chica, with both a higher DPS and much better range. It's a reliable unit that can deal damage from afar, and when you're in the later stages of the game, having that extra range can make a world of difference. It's definitely one of the better B-tier units to have around, especially when you're trying to cover more ground. So there you have it. These B-tier units won't always steal the show, but with the right placement and strategy, they can definitely pull their weight in the endgame. They've got their strengths, and while they aren't top tier, they can still hold their own in tough situations. Let me know what you think about these units and which ones you swear by in your battles. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Master Puppeteer, Nightmare Mangle, Springtrap, Valkyrie Chica, Endo-05, Fractured Bonnie, Hydra Mangle, Gunslinger Endo, Nightmare Bonnie, and Circus Baby. Alright, let's dive into some of the best A-tier units in Five Nights TD. You know, the ones that really pack a punch and bring the heat when you're up against those tougher waves. These aren't just your average units, we're talking about game changers that can turn the tide of battle if you know how to use them. Let's take a closer look at the ones that can definitely carry you to victory. First up, we've got the Master Puppeteer. Now, don't be fooled by its unassuming stats. This little guy may look like he's just another average unit, but once you see its attacks in action, you'll realize it's got a hidden trick up its sleeve. The DOT, damage over time, effect on its attacks multiplies its DPS by 10-fold. That means if you play your cards right, this unit will keep ticking away at the enemies long after they've passed through, making it a really solid pick for your lineup. Then, we've got Nightmare Mangle. Talk about a unit with style and substance. It's got this huge AoE attack, plus poison that deals damage over time. The cherry on top, it has a placement count of 3, meaning you can get multiple Mangles on the field at once. The only downside, its range is pretty bad. But hey, that's what supports and enchants are for, right? If you've got the right setup, this one will do some serious damage. Springtrap is another unit that makes the A tier cut, and for good reason. This guy's got insane pierce abilities, meaning it can hit multiple enemies at once with ease. Not only that, but it fires 5 piercing projectiles per attack, so you can imagine the kind of damage it can dish out. The only thing holding it back? A low maximum placement count of just 2, which limits how many you can deploy. But don't let that stop you, it's still an absolute powerhouse. Now, if you're looking for a reliable single target DPS, look no further than Valkyrie Chica. She might not have the splashy AoE abilities that some other units boast, but her high single target DPS makes her a solid pick. And the best part, she's incredibly cheap to place and upgrade, making her a great option if you're trying to build up your defenses without breaking the bank. It's like getting the best bang for your buck, but maybe you need something with a little more utility. That's where Endo-05 comes in. This unit can stun enemies while dishing out solid damage, making it perfect for crowd control. However, there's a little caveat. It has a pretty high cooldown, which means you won't be stunning enemies constantly. Still, its utility in certain situations is undeniable, and it can definitely make a difference when you're up against a tough crowd. Last but not least, we've got Fractured Bonnie. This unit is ridiculously good. It has some of the best DPS and range in the game right now, making it a must-have for those late game stages. But there is a catch. It's a bit expensive to get on the field. But if you're willing to spend a little extra, you'll get a monster of a unit that will obliterate everything in its path. So whether you're looking for crazy AoE damage, solid single target DPS, or even some crowd control, these A tier units in Five Nights TD will definitely help you get the job done. They're not perfect, but with the right strategy, they can be a huge asset in your endgame lineup. Just make sure to tweak your approach and use them to their full potential, and you'll be rocking those tough waves like a pro. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Nautic Crusher Mangle, Agonized Springtrap, Scarecrow Foxy, Dreadbear, Limitless Shadow, It's Me, Outlaw Freddy, Glitched Puppeteer, Bomber Boy, Jack O'Endo, and Reactor Freddy. Alright, if you're still with me and not already farming materials for your next unit, let's talk about some of the absolute insane S tier endgame units in Five Nights TD that are making waves right now. We're talking about those units that just break the game and leave your enemies crying in their tracks. Let's dive right in. First up, we have the Nautic Crusher Mangle. This is the ultimate upgrade from the Leviathan Mangle. It's got insane DPS, more placement spots, and a much longer range. But here's the kicker. Getting the materials to craft this beast, it's no walk in the park. You'll be grinding for hours just to get this thing on your team. But trust me, it's totally worth it if you want to wreak havoc in those late game waves. Then we have the Agonized Springtrap, which is straight up one of the best evolutions in the game. It's got a piercing attack, ridiculous DPS, and it just melts enemies. But wait, don't get too excited, because Fractured Bonnie still edges it out when dealing with single entities. It's like the Agonized Springtrap is the perfect partner in crime for dealing with swarms, but Bonnie's got that one-on-one punch. Let's not forget about Scarecrow Foxy. This guy is a splash type unit with excellent stats and a burn effect on its attacks. If you're looking for raw DPS, Scarecrow Foxy is one of the best options in the game, hands down. It's perfect for melting through large groups of enemies, and that burn damage? Chef's kiss. Just don't get caught off guard by its higher cost upgrades though, they're a bit spicy. Now, if you're looking for something with a little more utility, let me introduce you to Dreadbear. He's another AoE burn unit, but what makes him special is his stun ability. Sure, his stats might be lower than Scarecrow Foxy's, and his upgrades come at a steeper price, but that's stun. It's game changing. If you can manage the cost, Dreadbear is an awesome addition to your lineup, especially if you need crowd control. Moving on to Limitless Shadow, and oh boy, if you thought the game couldn't get any crazier, think again. This unit is borderline OP. With its cone AoE attack and a fully upgraded 10k damage output. The only downside is its somewhat low range, but honestly, that's a small price to pay for the sheer devastation this unit can bring. If you've got this guy in your roster, you're gonna feel like you're in control of the battlefield. And rounding things off with Glitched Puppeteer. This one is a late game powerhouse, basically the next evolution of Scott. With one of the highest DPS in the game, a crazy range, and a free placement limit, it's just broken. This is one of those units you'll want to build your strategy around if you're aiming for a high level push. It's so strong, it might just make you question if anything can even stand up to it. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Astral Bonnie, Old Man Consequences, Valkyrie Prime, RWQFSFASXC, Goliath Endo Freddy, and Night Marion. Alright, let's dive into the crazy world of S+ tier units in Five Nights TD, where the power levels are so off the charts, you might need sunglasses just to look at them. I'm talking about the true game changers, the ones that make every other unit feel like they're just warming up. First up, we've got Astral Bonnie. Now, this one's a beast, a continuous spasher/slow unit that delivers insane DPS, all while bringing some of the best utility in the game. She's not just a powerhouse though, she's also the only Apex rarity unit. That means she's gonna cost you, but trust me, it's totally worth it if you want to dominate the late game. Then, let's talk about Old Man Consequences. This dude is one of the newer meta AoE towers, and wow, does he pack a punch. High DPS, good range, and a 0.1 second cooldown. This guy is built for efficiency, plus, he's surprisingly cheap to place and upgrade compared to other endgame units. The only catch? You can only place one of him, but that's honestly a small price to pay for his insane damage output. He's a solid choice for taking down waves of enemies without breaking the bank. Now, if you're all about single target DPS, look no further than Valkyrie Prime. She absolutely outshines Valkyrie Chica in terms of damage output. I mean, we're talking several times more DPS. This girl isn't just good, she's basically a one-woman wrecking crew when it comes to taking down high health enemies. So if you're up against bosses or those tough foes that just won't go down, Valkyrie Prime is your go-to. Moving on to RWQFSFASXC, also known as Shadow Bonnie's more OP cousin. Let me tell you, this unit's damage is absolutely broken. No exaggeration, RWQFSFASXC can deal some of the highest damage in the game right now, making her arguably the strongest unit in Five Nights TD. If you're looking to absolutely melt through enemies with ease, this is your gal. Seriously, she's a game changer, and if you've got her in your lineup, you're already ahead of the competition. And last but definitely not least, we've got Goliath Endo Freddy. Now, this unit is a heavy hitter. Sure, he's got an insanely high placement cost, but it's totally justified when you look at what he brings to the table. Full AoE, amazing range, and some of the highest base damage numbers in the entire game. He's just too OP to ignore. On the flip side, you've got Night Marion, who may have a bit lower DPS than GF, but what she lacks in raw damage, she makes up for in range. Seriously, depending on the map, she can outperform Jeff. It's crazy how well she can cover large areas and wipe out enemies. So whether you're stacking up on damage or you need some seriously broken range, these S+ tier units have got you covered. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.